The first thing people saw was a man standing in the freezing night handing out warm food to strangers, his hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of a memory that never left him. He was 38 years old, his name was Daniel, and he had sworn long ago that no one in his city would go hungry the way he once did. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd truly love to know. And if there was a moment in this story that touched your soul, please share it with us in the comments. It would mean the world to us to hear your heart. Daniel had grown up in a forgotten corner of Chicago, his father gone too early, and his mother fighting endless battles with life. When Daniel was 12, he remembered a winter where their cupboards were empty and he had stolen a piece of bread from a corner store. He remembered the shame, the fear, and the hunger that followed him like a shadow. That night, as he handed steaming bowls of soup to a line of homeless people outside a small shelter, he whispered to himself, "Never again, not for me, not for them." But the city was cruel. Hunger stretched through the streets like a silent disease. People passed by with coffee cups and busy eyes, but never noticed the man sleeping in the doorway, never saw the child digging in a trash can. Daniel saw it all, and it haunted him, so he started with a single meal once a week. A pot of stew, borrowed space in a church basement, and a handful of volunteers who believed in him. Word spread fast. Hungry faces came from every block. Lines grew longer each night, and Daniel knew this was bigger than a weekend effort. He called it the Hearth Foundation, a place where food was not charity, but dignity. At first, he faced doubt. Some accused him of wasting time. Others said he would burn out within months, but Daniel had fire in his soul, and the memory of his own hunger burned hotter than any doubt. Every night, he drove his old pickup through alleys carrying trays of sandwiches. Every morning, he wrote letters begging local stores to donate bread, fruit, or milk. Some said yes, some slammed doors in his face, but he never stopped. One winter night, a boy no older than 12 appeared at the shelter with his sister. They were shivering, their cheeks raw from the wind. Daniel gave them soup and watched them eat in silence. He remembered his own childhood so vividly that tears blurred his sight. He knew then that the Hearth Foundation could not be temporary. This had to grow, it had to last long after him. But then came the first true test. The city inspector arrived one morning with papers in his hand. The building Daniel had rented cheaply was not approved for large gatherings. The shelter could be shut down within days. He stood in the cold, staring at the notice with volunteers around him, frightened and confused. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had promised the hungry safety. He had promised them a place to be human, and now the system was about to take it all away. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat alone in the dim shelter, staring at the cracked walls and listening to the soft breathing of the people inside. He thought about the notice clutched in his pocket and the words temporary closure echoing like a threat. Every instinct told him to fight, but fear whispered that he might lose everything. He closed his eyes and remembered the boy and his sister from the night before. If this place closed, where would they go? The question was like a knife in his chest. The next morning, he stood before his volunteers, their faces pale with worry. He told them they could walk away if they wanted. He would not blame them. The risks were heavy, but not a single person left. Instead, one woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. She said, "Daniel, if you believe in this, we will fight beside you." That moment gave him strength. He knew the Hearth Foundation was not his alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever tasted hunger and everyone who dared to stand against it. Daniel began visiting city offices begging for an extension. The inspectors were cold, the rules strict, and the deadlines merciless. He was told he needed a proper facility with kitchens, fire safety, and permits that cost more than he had ever seen in his life. He left each meeting with his heart heavier, but his resolve sharper. He would find a way, even if it meant losing sleep, working 2 jobs, or selling his own truck. The people needed him, and he would not let them down. Weeks turned into months. Daniel organized fundraisers at local parks. He spoke at schools, churches, and even outside busy subway stations. Sometimes people laughed at him, sometimes they ignored him, but sometimes a stranger stopped to listen and gave a few dollars. At night, he carried boxes of food, and by day, he carried the dream of a permanent home for the foundation. Slowly, donations grew, not much, but enough to keep hope alive. Then came an unexpected twist. A wealthy businessman named Robert passed by one of Daniel's sidewalk events. Curious, he stopped to listen. Robert had once lived through poverty himself, and Daniel's story cut into his heart. The next day, Robert called Daniel to his office. and slid a check across the table. It was enough to buy a small building on the edge of the city. Daniel stared at the paper in disbelief, his hands shaking. He knew this was not luck. This was the answer to a prayer whispered countless nights in the cold. The Hearth Foundation reopened stronger than before, a real kitchen, tables with chairs and a roof that did not leak. Families lined up outside every evening. Children laughed again as they ate bowls of soup. Volunteers grew in number, and soon the city that once ignored Daniel began to notice him. Reporters came, cameras flashed, and articles called him the man who fed hope. But Daniel never cared about the spotlight. He only cared about the next meal, the next hungry soul, the next night. Yet, even as the foundation thrived, Daniel's heart was never at peace. For every person he fed, he knew there were dozens more still wandering in alleys. For every child who smiled, there was another child still crying in hunger. He felt the weight of the world pressing on him. The mission was growing too fast, too heavy. Could he carry it forever? The question followed him like a shadow, waiting for the moment to break him. Years passed, and Daniel's hair turned silver, but his spirit never dimmed. The Hearth Foundation had spread across cities with kitchens, shelters, and mobile food trucks painted with bright colors. Families who once starved now sat together at tables, sharing warm bread and soup. Volunteers became an army of compassion, and what started in a cracked basement had become a movement across the nation. Daniel was no longer just a man, he was a symbol. Yet inside him, he still carried the memory of the boy who once stole bread from a corner store. He never forgot that hunger, and he never allowed himself to feel above the people he served. At 60, Daniel walked slower, but every night he still visited the kitchens, shaking hands with strangers, listening to their stories. Sometimes people wept in his arms, sometimes they whispered thank you with trembling voices. He would smile and tell them they mattered. He would remind them that hunger did not define their worth. Hope did. That message spread louder than food ever could. But with growth came storms. Powerful groups who questioned his work claimed he was wasting resources. Some accused him of exploiting poverty. Others tried to cut funding. Yet each time the Hearth Foundation was threatened, the people defended it. Families who had once eaten Daniel's food stood outside City Hall, holding signs. Children spoke in schools about how they were alive because a man had believed they deserved a meal. The city could not silence them, and Daniel realized the foundation no longer needed him to survive. It had become larger than his own life. One cold winter, when Daniel was 89, he collapsed during a speech at a fundraiser. The crowd gasped, volunteers rushed forward, and doctors warned him to slow down. But he refused. He told them, "If I have one breath left, it will be used to fight hunger." He returned to the kitchens within weeks, fragile, yet unbroken. His presence alone lifted spirits. The sight of an old man still serving bread was more powerful than any speech. As he reached 90, his body finally began to fail. Friends begged him to rest, to let go, but Daniel only smiled. He said, "I was once a boy with nothing. I leave this world knowing thousands will never feel that same emptiness. That is enough." One evening, he sat quietly in the shelter watching children laugh. As they shared meals, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." And in that silent moment, surrounded by the sound of joy, he passed away peacefully. The city mourned, streets filled with candles and photographs. People gathered outside every Hearth Foundation center, holding bowls of soup high in the air, not in sorrow but in gratitude. The man who once fed a handful of hungry strangers had ignited a fire that would never die. His story became a legend, told to children in schools, repeated in churches, and written in history books. And the Hearth Foundation lived on, stronger than ever, because Daniel had given his life to prove that one act of kindness could change the fate of countless souls.